Hello and welcome to the webinar. My name's Dr. David Wilkinson and you're going to be discovering on this webinar the secrets to 3 common foods that you can probably find in your cupboard right now. Well, this presentation is for you if you have any concerns about cancer, and there are a lot of situations you may be in. For example, if we consider this couple here who are faced with different advice from different people saying, try this treatment, try this cure, try this food, and they really don't know what to believe or what to do. If you've had cancer treatment and want protection into the future, then this will help you. If you have a risk factor for cancer, such as a family history, then this information will also be very useful. And this is for you if you are interested in a natural approach to your health. You may have been told all sorts of different kinds of food and supplements that can reduce your cancer risk, but you don't know what to choose. You can't eat them all, and you have to decide who to believe and where you're going to place your focus. This can make you feel isolated and alone in trying to decide what to do. And this is for you if you really want some evidence. You may have spent hours looking through books, researching the internet for yourself, trying to find out what's worth putting your energy into and whether there really is any evidence for these things, and it can be extraordinarily frustrating. If you want to escape from the stress of figuring it all out for yourself, then this will help you. Well, what about me? What led me here? I am a medical doctor. I studied medicine. I am registered with the Medical Board of Australia. I am a member of the Australian Medical Association. I have a degree in medicine and surgery and a fellowship with the Royal Australasian College of Surgeons. So I became a cancer surgeon, and I was doing my work as a cancer surgeon thinking that other elements of the cancer care were being provided by other members of the team, not really focusing on lifestyle factors such as nutrition. And then at one of our multidisciplinary meetings, another specialist had returned from a cancer meeting in America, the American Society of Clinical Oncology. And what they presented was the findings from a paper that said that a diet had actually made a difference to cancer recurrence and cancer outcomes. Well, this is something we hadn't really focused on. But the interesting thing was that no one in the team really took that on as their role to provide that information to people or to look into it further. And I realized that there were gaps in the system when it came to lifestyle changes that could really affect cancer outcomes. And around this time I also noticed that there were a couple of my colleagues. One was a cancer surgeon in Sydney, another one was a researcher in the UK, both of whom had been diagnosed with cancer, and conventional treatments were going to be of limited value for them. And now that this became a personal thing, they started researching anti-cancer nutrition and also other lifestyle factors that could increase their chances. And that made me think, wow, when this gets personal, people start to really look into it and try to discover whether the information on this subject is reliable or not. And all this time, patients were asking me when I saw them after their surgery, for example, what else can I do to reduce my risk of this cancer coming back? Is there a special diet? And what about the fact that my other doctors are just telling me do everything in moderation? Should I believe them, or should I pursue this particular approach? And I really couldn't answer them. No one else was answering them either. So once again, here was a gap. So patients asked me to read things. They say, what do you think about this book? And one of the books that I was offered was the China study by Professor Colin Campbell. And this brought home to me that there was some science behind this. Professor Campbell found a link between diet and cancer, firstly in Filipino children and then in Chinese rural ladies, and he then took this further and started to try to support that with laboratory studies, and I became more aware that there was some science behind it and we should be paying attention to that. So my background includes scientific research. I've published a number of peer-reviewed articles in medical journals, and I've been committed to education for many years, both teaching medical students and other surgeons, presenting at meetings, attending courses. So I've done aid work in Tonga and then more recently research groups in Brisbane I've been involved with. And in both of these settings, as far apart in time and place as they were, it became very apparent that lifestyle factors, including nutrition, made a big difference to health. I mean, it sounds ridiculous that I even should have to say that. It should be such an obvious statement, but we need to deliver the information that goes with that. So, the China study led me to some other so-called light reading, and there are dozens of books like these ones that I then felt obliged to look at. I wanted to see what patients were reading. I wanted to see what they were being exposed to, so that I could decide whether that was going to help them or not. They were asking me for that information. Some of these books were very good, but a lot of them lacked detail. They lacked evidence. They presented stuff with no real grounds at all, and other parts of it were very good. But how did we distill this down into some useful, practical, concise information that people can apply? And that's one of the things that I'm trying to do for you. So that information, then the ideas that come out in that popular literature, can then be tested further by looking at journals. And there is masses of evidence in the medical journals, such things as these ones I've got on the screen that I had to read in order to verify the ideas or discount the ideas that patients were presenting, and that we needed to see, the validity of them. Journals of nutrition, anti-cancer research, population studies, cancer prevention research, this type of thing. And I was really surprised, I probably shouldn't have been, to find that there was a lot of support for using nutrition against cancer. So I read these popular books. Going on websites nearly drove me mad. You will have seen this yourself, where you'll read a statement in one place and then you go to another website and you think, that's funny, this is the same information, maybe it's true, but then you look at it closely and you realize it's actually been a cut and paste. They haven't even checked the information for themselves, and when this particular information gets repeated over and over again in a number of sites, you start to think it's true, but what about tracing back to the original statement and finding whether it has any evidence or not? There might be a claim that a certain nutrient cures cancer, then you find it was a laboratory study that looked at 6 rats. Well, that's not going to really be good enough for me to change my diet for the rest of my life, and I'm sure you feel the same way. I started speaking at seminars for patients, doctors and community groups, and I wrote this book, which took several years, because I didn't want to put anything in there unless I knew there was some evidence for it, something that would give me the confidence to change the way I'm living. Now, a lot of people think that cancer is due to genetics, but genetic causes of cancer are very few. Most cancers, this means, are actually related to our environment. And if it's our environment, then it's something we have some control over. And that environment includes what we put into our bodies by way of our food. Now, in Australia, we're expecting 50,000 deaths a year from cancer. And the thing is that a large number of these are preventable. This has been reported by the Medical Journal of Australia. The same thing is true in the United States, where a bigger population, but 600,000 or more cancer deaths a year. And what the statistics show is that 1/3 of these are attributable to lifestyle factors such as nutrition. So we should really be focusing on this. Now, I mentioned we look at the some of the science behind this, and there is a biology of cancer cells that we can study, and we can manipulate this biology to our advantage to reduce the chances of cancers growing. There are many types of research, and I suppose perhaps this is one of the reasons why some doctors present nutritional information. Well, actually very few of them do, but others tend not to. I mean, I've spoken to my colleagues about the things that I've discovered with regard to anti-cancer nutrition, and they've often said to me, well, where's the evidence? Where are the trials? If it was really true, why didn't our professors teach us this at medical school? If it was really true, why isn't it in the textbooks? And that's a good question, and there is an answer to that. But I suppose in practice, what a lot of us have seen in in treating patients with cancer is that sometimes people have used alternative methods of cancer treatment and have run into trouble with it. And this brings a lifestyle approach into disrepute. And I'll share a couple of examples with you because these are examples that tend to turn people away from nutritional methods of treating cancer, and that's only because these cases illustrate how not to do it, how to pursue a nutrient or an alternative treatment that doesn't have evidence behind it, or you haven't been shown how to do it properly. When I was a young surgeon in my first year of what we call advanced training, we had a patient with a bowel obstruction that required surgery. Now, when we operated on that patient, we found that the bowel was completely blocked with kilograms of compacted seeds, and this was further blocking the bowel with a blockage that had been started by a cancer that was growing there. And that makes you look at it and say, well, if only this patient hadn't taken all these seeds and they'd come and had their surgery sooner, they might be all right now. And you start to think, oh, these nutritional cures that people come up with are really dangerous. And there are other stories like that that my colleagues could tell you. So then when you say, hey, there's science in nutrition, we can make a difference by promoting this to people, then our colleagues are saying, I'm not too sure about that. And so they ignore the evidence. But there is evidence, and there's evidence in population studies. So, for example, here we see this family from Japan, and it's been well known for a long time that Japanese people who migrate to the United States start to develop the risk of cancer at an increased rate compared to when they were in Japan. So Japanese cancer rates tend to be low, apart from some particular types. These people, when they move to the United States, start to develop cancer at the rate of Americans. So it's not genetic, it's the same genetics they had before. All what's changed is their environment in terms of nutrients. We can then look at that and say, well, what is it about the Japanese people? Is it their diet? We know they have a higher iodine intake. We know they have more green tea and mushrooms. Maybe it's one of those things. We can then take those to the laboratory and see if in animal studies iodine does reduce cancer growth. And if that's brought out in animal studies, and we can then look at these cells under the microscope and see what iodine is really doing to cancer cells, what's green tea really doing to cancer cells under the microscope, that gives further support to using that nutrient against cancer. So those are population studies and laboratory studies. Then, of course, we have randomized control trials. So this is where we divide the study group into two parts. One part gets the special diet, in this case. One part gets carry on with the diet you're eating before, and then we're going to monitor them into the future and see if our diet we're hoping will reduce cancer risk or cancer recurrence is going to have an impact. The problem with this is that in nutritional studies, it's very hard to make people eat the thing that you're asking them to eat for a long period of time, because cancer is not usually an emergency. It changes over several years. Recurrences can occur several years later. How are we going to keep this group of patients strictly having this nutrient for that many years? And what actually happens is the ones who are supposed to be taking the special food actually slack off a little bit and don't follow it closely. The ones who are not meant to be on a special diet, they realize they're in a diet study and they think, oh, I better clean up my act. I'm going to have a healthier diet. So there we see over a few years, the two groups end up having very little difference in their diet. So the fact that these randomized studies on nutrition actually show any difference at all, and they show a small improvement, but not as much as we'd expect, the fact that it shows any difference is quite incredible. So we're not necessarily going to see randomized trials of nutrients at a great rate, even though there are a few of them which are very useful. But what I'm saying is, don't believe it when people tell you that they're waiting for more evidence, because there's plenty of evidence already, and I'm going to present some more of that to you. This is an example. We see in this chart this study by Rock and that research team with 1,551 women who had a history of breast cancer. Now, these had been in a dietary study. These were taken from the arm that hadn't been told to take a particular diet, and what the researchers did to evaluate how many how much vegetables they'd had in their diet is to measure the level of carotenoids or carotenoids in their blood, and that reflected their vegetable intake. The groups were divided into 4 parts. In quarters, the top quarter had the highest level of carotenoids, and so forth down. And what they found is that in that top group, the blue line, the patients who had the higher vegetable intake had a lower risk of a recurrence of their cancer or developing a new breast cancer. And the difference was statistically significant. That was amazing, and there are other studies like this. So, going back to the science of it and the biology, angiogenesis is the development of new blood vessels. So we know that a normal cell becomes a cancer cell and then starts to grow and divide. But unless it can draw new blood vessels into it, it doesn't have the nutrients to progress. So if we can block those growth of those new blood vessels with particular nutrients, then the cancer can never get more than 1 or 2 millimeters in size because it'll be starved. Angiogenesis has been studied by a number of groups, including Dr. Lee here, and you'll see in the first picture, all of the white filaments there represent new blood vessel growth. In the second one, in this study, a plant nutrient was applied to this, and look, there's hardly any of those white filaments. So that plant nutrient was able to block angiogenesis. If we can take this nutrient in, then we can block angiogenesis in our own bodies. Apoptosis is a term that refers to, in the Greek origin of it, the way leaves naturally fall off a tree. In biology, it refers to programmed cell death. So our body knows how to get rid of bad cells. We've got wonderful checks and balances in our body that keep us healthy, and one of them is removal of damaged or dangerous or defective or aging cells, and that's apoptosis. We see it in embryology. It's the way in which tadpoles lose their tails and the human hand forms, and it's the way the body removes cancer cells. But cancers can turn off apoptosis to some degree. For some reason they resist it, and yet there are plant nutrients that promote apoptosis, and we can take advantage of this. Another one is cell signaling. So EGCG, which is in green tea, is important in this way. Now this illustration is a cell. We see the factors that the cell is exposed to trigger a chain reaction which then reaches the nucleus and gives the signal for the cell to divide. And cancer cells are very prone to dividing. If we can block this chain reaction, then we can stop cells dividing. And green tea blocks this in a number of places. So instead of cell division, we see growth inhibition and apoptosis. Then there's this concept of synergy. The illustration is from a book by Beliveau and Gingras, and the angiogenesis illustration was from their book as well. And what they beautifully depict here is that one type of plant nutrient may be working in one way and another works in another way. Together we see synergy. In other words, it's not just an additive effect, as in 1 + 1 = 2, but it's a multiplying effect. 1 + 1 = 3 or 4. Because these nutrients are working at different angles to block cancer growth and to improve our body's resistance to cancer. So the nutrient might cause death of cancer cells, it might stop blood vessels growing, it might promote the immune system, it might improve our digestive system so that we have higher levels of these nutrients when we take them on. And this is all information that's been carefully studied and set out, and it should be information that anyone with a cancer concern has in their armamentarium. So we're coming to the 3 common foods that that you can use to fight cancer, and you can start today. So this information can be applied straight away. And the first one is garlic. I'll also be talking about turmeric and green tea. Well, garlic belongs to the allium family, which also includes onions and leeks. And I'll be talking a little about the research and the chemistry and a secret. So I told you that I'd tell you secrets of these common foods, and I really mean that. I wish they weren't secrets, but the fact is not enough people know about this stuff. So it has been a bit of a secret, and we're going to uncover it for you. Now, there are population studies that show that garlic eaters, people who have more than average amounts of garlic, have lower cancer rates. We've had studies from different parts of the world with different kinds of cancer. For example, the United States study showed a reduction in colorectal cancer amongst people who had a history of having more garlic in their diet. Same with various cancers from Italy and Switzerland. In the San Francisco study, it was pancreas, and then we see it in France and China in breast, stomach, and prostate cancers. So garlic eaters have a lower rate of cancer when we look at population studies. Now, how much are you going to eat? Well, that's a concern for some people, I suppose, particularly when you see that in the China research, they had to eat 1.5 kilograms of garlic a year. That sounds like a lot, but of course, you're not eating that all at once. And it really just comes to 5 grams a day to reduce cancer risk in those particular studies. And 1 clove is 2 to 4 grams. So other studies require a little bit less garlic to make a difference. And overall, the suggestion is that even 1 clove a few times a week will reduce cancer risk. Now, the chemistry of this is very important because this substance or molecule called DADS, or diallyl disulfide, is one of the things in garlic that has an anti-cancer effect. You see, when a cell is in the process of replicating, it goes through a certain number of steps, and at each step there's what we call a checkpoint. If the body thinks that that cell is defective, at that checkpoint the division process is turned off. Now, DADS is able to hold the cell in that moment so that the body has an opportunity to recognize it as defective, and then apoptosis can occur and the bad cell can be removed. So we want the DADS to be able to work. Now, garlic contains a substance called allein. Allein is converted to DADS, but it needs this enzyme allanase for that to happen. Now, the internet gives information on different cancer foods. You've probably looked at that already. That's how you came across me, no doubt, is by looking through the internet. But a lot of these sites just aren't helpful enough. They give you half the information, but halfway doesn't get you there. If you're crossing a bridge, for example, does it? You want to get all the way across, otherwise it hasn't done you much good. Now, in this study, they recognized, you'll see in that bottom paragraph, crushing of the clove helps to release beneficial enzymes. As we just said, we need the garlic to be crushed so that allanase is released and can do the conversion to the allein. But they don't fill in the missing gap. And that is that time is required for this to happen. You see, allanase is heat sensitive. So if you chop up your garlic and cook it straight away, the allanase is ineffective. It's damaged and the allein doesn't get converted to the DADS. So this lady's looking smug because she knows the secret. She's chopping her garlic at the beginning of her meal preparation, waiting 10 or 15 minutes. The DADS is then being formed. It's not so heat sensitive as the allanase, so it can then be cooked and we're still getting the benefit of the DADS. So garlic must be chopped early, release the enzymes, wait 10 minutes, give a chance for the DADS to be formed. Now, the next food I'm going to talk about is turmeric, or turmeric as some people say. Turmeric comes from the plant called Curcuma longa, and in fact the active anti-cancer nutrient in turmeric is called curcumin, from the name Curcuma longa. You'll usually see turmeric as a powdered spice, commonly used in curries, where maybe a tablespoon or so will be used. But we can also use the fresh rhizome. So this is it's like a stem of the plant that's under the ground, and it looks a little bit like ginger. It's a bright orange colour. The fresh one you have to use more because it's not as densely packed, but it has the advantage of having its own oil, and you'll see the importance of that in a minute. Also, I think it tastes a little bit better. Be careful when you're preparing it, because I don't want you to blame me when you spoil your good shirt, because it's a very bright orange yellow colour. Now, I told you about research before and how a lot of health practitioners just aren't aware of how much research there is, and I was one of them, I have to confess. But now I've seen all this stuff, I just got to tell you about it. If we go to this site called PubMed, where we can look at all the medical literature on these things and type in curcuma curcumin and cancer, you'll see, and this was a few months ago I did this search, 3,475 results came up. Now, these researchers are finding how curcumin acts against cancer at a microscopic and biological level, and there'll be other types of studies there. And each of these, before they set out on these studies, they always evaluate the literature that's gone before. And they wouldn't pursue further studies unless the literature already showed something. So I can tell you nearly all these studies, if not all of them, are showing an anti-cancer effect of curcumin. And we can't ignore this massive information. Here's a human trial example where patients who have familial adenomatous polyposis, so this is a condition, unfortunately, it is one of the genetic ones, where families develop polyps in the bowel, and these polyps continue to grow and progress until eventually a bowel cancer is formed, and really the only treatment we have for it is to remove the bowel, because the onward march of these polyps towards a cancer is virtually inevitable. Now, in this study, the patients had a colonoscopy, an examination of their bowel, before and after a supplement of curcumin and quercetin was given. The number of bowel polyps and the size of them was recorded beforehand, and then again after the supplement, after a period of time. And in most people, well, in all these patients, normally these polyps would progress, but in this study they actually reduced in number, and that's quite an incredible finding. Once again, we look at what the internet may be saying about turmeric, and a lot of people have identified it as an anti-cancer food, but have they given us all the information? Well, here they've said it can inhibit some kinds of cancer cells in laboratory studies and so forth, but there's no detail. So when we're looking at nutrition, we want to have detail, because the details make the difference. And the secret here with turmeric is absorption. So in the first graph you'll see here, the study looked at curcumin taken either alone or with piperine, which is from black pepper. The line joined by the black dots is in those who had the curcumin on its own. And you see what they've done here is they've had some curcumin, then they've done blood tests to see how much curcumin is in the blood. And in those patients, there's a gradual rise of curcumin in the blood. But when they took it with black pepper, it's the red dots, the line going through the red dots, and you'll see there's a much bigger spike in the amount of curcumin in the blood, and the overall effect is going to be much greater, isn't it? The same thing, interestingly, when curcumin is taken with oil. So it's a separate study. This one now is looking at oil, and once again, the small dots, we see a small spike in curcumin in the blood, and then the solid line is when curcumin was taken with oil, a much higher dose, if you like. It's like a medicine. There's a bigger dose of curcumin in the blood. So this is one with black pepper and one with oil. Well, obviously, what are you going to do? You're going to take it with black pepper and oil. People are concerned about the bioavailability of curcumin, you see, and the fact that it's not going to be very well absorbed. But we can improve the blood levels of it by 20 times just by having it with black pepper. And like I said before, I don't want this to be a secret anymore. I want you to tell all your friends, like this man knows. He's in the restaurant, he's asking for his turmeric with olive oil and black pepper. And you may not be familiar with turmeric, you might not be used to cooking with it, but there are lots of ways you can take it. It's just a matter of experimenting with these and deciding on something that works for you. So it can be added to scrambled eggs and frittatas, it can be toasted with roast vegetables, added to rice or sautéed greens, used in soups, marinades, yogurt, pickles, paste, and there are ways of drinking turmeric as well, in tea or even combined with ginger tea. There's a recipe for Indian golden milk and various smoothies. So it's possible to incorporate these things into your diet, even if you thought it's something that you wouldn't normally have eaten. And the third food we're going to look at here is green tea. Not really a food, I suppose, but a nutrient. And we'll look at what types of tea there are and the chemistry and the secret, again, of this particular nutrient. So tea is from the plant called Camellia sinensis. And the interesting thing is that green tea and black tea are actually from the same tea plant. It's just a matter of how those leaves are prepared after they're harvested. Now, green tea is treated with a light amount of heat, either by pan roasting or steaming, to neutralize the enzymes that oxidize it. Whereas in black tea, the oxidation is allowed to occur. Now, the problem with the oxidation process in converting it from the tea leaf, the natural tea leaf, into black tea, is that the enzyme that produces EGCG is also damaged. So green tea preserves this EGCG, which is a short term for a catechin. And this is the catechin in green tea that has the anti-cancer effects. So black tea won't have the same anti-cancer effect. It does have a little bit of an anti-cancer effect, but not nearly as much as if we preserve the catechins. Now, there have been a number of population studies, well, these are just a couple of examples of it, where we've seen a reduction in risk of cancer of the stomach and the esophagus. They've been able to show that in prostate cancer, fewer cancers progress to invasive disease in patients who have a higher intake of green tea. And we see a beneficial effect in breast cancer as well, where there are fewer recurrences of breast cancer, there are fewer affected lymph nodes, and in young women, fewer cancers altogether, if we see a history of a higher than average green tea intake. And how does it work? Well, you see in the illustration here, in order for cancer to form and to progress, there are a number of different mechanisms at work. There has to be cell division, the cells develop an immortality, there has to be this new blood vessel growth, the ability to invade and spread, and these are all ways that cancer progresses that if we know about, we can attempt to block. And what we find in studying these nutrients against cancer, including green tea, is that green tea helps in a number of ways. We've seen that it blocks the cell signals that promote cell growth. We've seen that it can stop angiogenesis, and I've talked about apoptosis, but it works in many other ways in preventing invasion, detoxifying, and reducing body weight. You see, being overweight is an important risk factor for cancer that we can control. And in amongst this big list is antioxidants. So it is important to have antioxidants for health, and that has an important anti-cancer role as well. But when we go to the internet, the focus is all on this. What about all of the other elements of the way that green tea can work? So on this internet site, they talk about green tea having antioxidants and having more antioxidants than black tea. Well, that's quite right, but why don't they give more detail? Because as you'll see, there's some very important detail that makes a big difference. And what I'm talking about is the way that it's prepared. How long do we wait? What type of tea leaves do we use? Well, in this study, it was quite simple. They used boiling water, and the tea was steeped for either 30 seconds or 5 minutes. And you'll see that when it was left for 30 seconds, the catechin level was only 43. So they can easily do the study, take the tea out, measure the catechins in it. And when it was steeped for 5 minutes, the catechin level is more than double as when it was just for 30 seconds. Now, this is very important because when you buy green tea, or when you talk to green tea connoisseurs, they're interested in the flavor. They're not thinking about anti-cancer nutrition. So they're saying, oh, if you want the best flavored green tea, you just want to use water that's at 60 or 70 degrees, not boiling, and you want to prepare it and consume it pretty much straight away. Well, that's not going to work for us, because we've found that boiling water and steeping for 5 minutes is key to improving the amount of catechins in there. And on that internet picture I just showed you now, there was a green tea with a tea bag in it. Well, we see here that 117 figure comes from tea that's been steeped for 5 minutes, but the leaves had to be loose. If it was a tea bag, the levels were a lot lower. So if you're going to use a tea bag, tear it open and let the leaves float free, and you'll get much higher levels of catechins. And here we see the comparison between green tea and black tea, where green tea has much higher levels of catechins than black tea, and certainly more than fruit teas. In this particular study, and this is another key thing we can take advantage of, you see, when you look at the studies that show that green tea is effective, you may find that people are requiring 3 or 6 cups of tea a day, and you're thinking, well, I'm not going to do that. But is there a way of us getting a bigger dose of the catechins from a smaller number of cups of green tea? Because then we'd be more enthusiastic to incorporate that. In this study, they took volunteers and they said, okay, you can have this catechin supplement with taken on an empty stomach, and the other half of the group will have it after or with a meal, and we'll see what the absorption is like. And we get this graph a little bit like the ones we looked at before, where you see the patients who had green tea or had the catechin with food, they are the empty circles, and you'll see there's a small increase in the blood level. So they took the EGCG, and then they had blood tests over 5 minutes and 10, 15 minutes and seeing what the levels of catechins were like in their blood. The ones who had it on a full stomach had a small peak, not very high at all. The ones who had it on an empty stomach, they had a big peak in the catechin levels of their blood. And you can see overall this is like a bigger dose. So food is like medicine. We can get a better dose by knowing how to ingest it. So here are the secrets to maximizing the levels of EGCG, or the effective anti-cancer nutrient in green tea. We want to use leaves or powder instead of tea bags. We want to use boiling water, wait 5 minutes, and take it on an empty stomach. So, in recapping this, we've looked at 3 common foods to fight cancer, and this is information you can start applying straight away. The first food is garlic, the second one is turmeric, and the third one is green tea. So, having seen this information, I'm sure you're ready to race out and prepare yourself a cup of green tea the proper way, and perhaps to make yourself an omelette. You can chop up your garlic early and wait 10 minutes before you cook it, and you can add turmeric, making sure you've got a little bit of oil and plenty of black pepper. So you're probably wondering whether you can get other information like this that's also going to reduce your cancer risk. And I'd like to show you a way that you can access that kind of information. And hopefully you've seen from my presentation that I've learned a lot about this that I'd like to share with you. And this is a way that you can have me as your teacher and mentor to guide you through this process. And I think that this is something that everyone should have access to. So I've developed a program that's very affordable for anyone. I'm going to show you a way that will enable you to become a master at recognizing anti-cancer foods. You'll be able to look at a plate of food or a menu and recognize the ingredients in it that are going to be good for you or bad for you in a cancer sense. I'm going to enable you to know the secrets to maximizing the effects. Like those things I just showed you for those foods, other foods have their own secrets that apply. And you'll have me to guide you and mentor you through this process. You'll have access to me with any questions that come up along the way, and certainly a lot of questions come up with nutrition, you find, the more you look into this. So the first option you have is to struggle along as you have been already, trying to figure it all out for yourself, fighting your way through the maze of internet sites and books, spending time and money with no certainty that you'll be any further ahead at the end of all of that struggle. And what you'll get out of this program is a scientific, evidence-based answer to the question of which foods are effective against cancer and how to practically apply that knowledge for the best results. You'll have access to me personally to answer any questions that come up as you incorporate this nutritional treasure trove into your everyday life. So this is something that goes on forever. We all eat food every day. We may as well make that an experience that's going to improve our health and be so knowledgeable about it. I mean, really, as children we should have been told this, but most of us are ignorant about what the benefits of this type of approach can be. The program is perfect if you've just been diagnosed with cancer, you've already undergone treatment for cancer, you might have finished treatment, maybe even some time ago, and you've had a bit of a scare that's made you start thinking about it again. You may have a friend or a family member that's affected, or you may never have had cancer, but you just want to do your best to prevent it happening. And of course this will be useful for healthcare professionals that want to teach people the information. So the Food Against Cancer 6-month membership program starts with weekly video tutorials which will be emailed to you. You'll be learning about cancer principles, the top 10 foods. So you'll be told when you go to the internet sites that there are so many different foods, you don't know which ones are really important and which ones aren't. And having looked at the literature, I've found the ones that have the most evidence for them and the most convincing evidence for them and put them in the top 10. There are other foods that are also useful, and I'm mentioning those as well as teaching about what we call everyday superfoods and what not to eat. You'll learn how to apply this plan, and then there will be some bonus modules. So additional things to round out a lifestyle approach. And one of these modules is on exercise against cancer. You can reduce your cancer risk by knowing the facts about what type of exercise and how much to be done. And the second bonus module is on the anti-cancer effects of vitamin D, which you get from the sunshine, but there's a lot to know about how to optimize your vitamin D levels as well. The second part of the program is the Facebook private group, where you can access me at any time with any questions. It gives you the opportunity to ask me any questions that have come up as you're working through the program, things you don't quite understand or ideas that you might have heard from other people and you want to verify their accuracy. And you also get to discuss these ideas with other people who are working through the same challenges. That can be very useful. The third part of the program is that you receive a copy of my book. And this goes hand in hand with the membership program. It reinforces what you're learning from the video tutorials. It has additional details in some areas, and it contains all of the resources and references for the information I teach. And for this, there is a ebook that I can provide for you, but I recommend the hard book, and I just asked the postage to be covered for that. Now remember the chart we looked at before, this study from Rock, where people who were not even on a special diet but had a higher level of vegetable molecules in their blood had lower risk of cancer recurrence. What if those people actually had been on these top 10 foods? What if they actually knew how to prepare them in a certain way to improve the anti-cancer effects of them? Imagine what we could do with that top line. We could make it even higher on that graph, so the risk of recurrence of cancer, the risk of a new cancer, is even more significantly reduced. So the program is a 6-month membership, $29 a month. It includes the weekly video tutorials covering all the foods that you should and shouldn't eat. It includes the private Facebook group where you can ask questions, and includes a hard copy of my book. So if you're interested in this program, then please let me know. I'm very enthusiastic about disseminating this information as widely as possible, and I look forward to seeing you on the program. If you would like more information, then you can click on the link below this screen.